Hello and welcome to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo, and hosted by Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson.
Welcome to our regular monthly podcast looking at the performance of trade values with Brego. We're joined by Rupert Pontin, Head of Insight and Communication at Brego, who will take us through the key trends that impacted used car trade values over the course of May. Brego uses a unique valuation and forecast methodology and prides itself on providing world-class retail-driven trade value pricing insight from the widest available market data set in the UK. To achieve this, it collects up to 1 million retail prices daily and uses a historical database with over 2.2 billion data points. So welcome to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, Rupert. It's the last week of the month, which will mean you're doing your final number crunching. How's it all coming along?
Hi, Curtis. Good to be here. Yes, it is the last week of the month, and I am crunching numbers furiously. It's been a different month. It's a bit of a difficult month in some respects, although some of the headline data looks fairly stable, but that's not quite the case, as you'll see as we go through. But it's a busy time, and I think everybody's trying to be busy in the trade as a whole.
Yeah, I like to think you do your number crunching in a darkened room somewhere.
I'd like to say that's true, but no, I do like a little bit of daylight and a glass of water.
Unlike myself, Rupert, but yeah. But no, I think daily, it's probably a daily thing. It's not necessarily monthly. It's daily. You crunch your numbers to check what's going on in the market, etc. So.
Yeah, it's constant, but once we get towards the end of the month, it's good to see how it's shaping up. We always get quite a bit of data come through towards the end of the month. As you know, dealers will push towards getting sales targets and so forth done, and the numbers can change a little bit, as they do with new car registrations, but not quite as severely over the last couple of days.
Yeah, definitely. So putting that, let's go underway with today then, because it really reflects on what we've just been chatting about there. Let's start off with, give us some of the sort of headline figures for the trade values in May, and how they compared with last month and this point last year.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I think first thing to say is that where we sit at the moment from a sales perspective, we're seeing a drop in sales of 3.4%. As it stands at the moment, and just a slight decline in average retail selling price of 1.31%. But when we look at the trade values, there's all sorts of insight that you can pick out from what's been going on during the course of the month. And looking, first of all, I'll just cover off what it looks like from a market sector point of view. So I've broken this down by the traditional market sectors. But from an overall perspective, the month-on-month movement we have for trade values is an increase of 0.92%, which is probably a little bit out of character for this time of the year. But yes, a climb of 0.9%. And that really ranges between a drop of 4.9% that we saw for SUV medium, which I think for me was a little bit of a surprise. And in fact, year on year, that is a drop of 11.1% in the actual price. So year on year, the average price for SUV medium is sitting £1,735 lower than it was before in 2025. And that ranges, as I said, between that minus 4.9% for SUV medium to the upper medium sector, which saw an increase of 2.5% month on month. And that is based on an average trade price of £10,474. So everything there, there's lots of stuff, different sectors that have minimal movements, but those were the two extremes. I don't know how you feel about those.
Yeah, I think, it's probably, I think it's a mixed month answer. I mean, it's certainly been a month of many outputs and sort of not quite the norm, has it, from that headline figure?
I think in the background it's masking a variance in the demand, not just from the consumer but also from the point of view of what the dealers are prepared to actually stock, and I think they're being a little bit reticent about taking on larger volumes of stock at this particular juncture, given what's going on with the economy as a whole. That is, of course, except for Big Motoring World, who have a new big site to fill. But if I just delve a little bit more into a bit more detail for you, looking at what we've seen in terms of trade price movements by fuel type, and this is where we find some interesting little nuances, really. So in terms of month-on-month movement on trade values, they range between, as I said, we know the overall market 0.9%, but by fuel type, the average trade price of electric vehicles has increased by 4.2%. So that was the high point, the high figure. And I'll come back to that in just a second. And the lowest and the biggest change in the negative side was for diesel parallel PHEVs, although we know there aren't too many of those in the marketplace as a whole. But I think really interesting to see that the trade price has come up by 4%, 4.2%. And I think that represents the demand that we've experienced since the trouble in the Middle East, with consumers looking for a way of cutting costs by changing the type of fuel that they have in their vehicles. So at 4.2%, I think that's a clear indication that there is good demand for those, certainly in the trade, but I think we also see that in the retail market as well.
And looking at those EVs, Rupert, are there any particular high risers? Because as an average, that's pretty high, and we're not used to seeing that. So, were there any standout models there?
So the biggest standout models that we've seen in terms of desirability have actually been Polestar, particularly, and there is a particular demand around some of the MG models, which I think are both more mainstream than we see from other electric vehicle manufacturers. But the other thing to mention here is that when we look at what goes on in the electric marketplace, there is quite a push from Stellantis Group to get vehicles into the marketplace. Now, that doesn't result necessarily in an increase in trade value for them, because there are quite a few of those around, particularly in particularly if you're looking at pre-registered vehicles, and that obviously has an impact on what goes on in the used marketplace as a whole.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was going to ask you about pre-regs. How did they track over the course of the month? Were there any notable trends in terms of ICE vehicles as well as EVs in pre-regs?
That's a really good question. So the volume of pre-regs, I'm just looking for the data as we are talking, but the volume of pre-regs, I think, has declined slightly this month, which is interesting because I think that the number of vehicles that are being pre-registered and finding homes, electric vehicles particularly, and that are finding homes quickly, has increased. But that because of the speed of sale on some of those cars, we don't actually see an increase in the volume of pre-registrations. Do you see what I mean when I'm saying that?
Yes, yeah, sure. And were there any OEMs that were particularly active in pre-reg? I know you say it wasn't as big as last month, but did anyone stand out there?
Well, I don't mean to talk badly of them again, but it is Stellantis product. They're pushing as much as they can in the marketplace, particularly around Vauxhall. And actually, we saw some quite high numbers of Jeep as well.
And I mean, we've mentioned obviously about fuel types, and obviously every time everyone wants to have a conversation about EVs in particular, Rupert. I mean, what did you see with EVs through the month of May, and probably as a bit of a follow-up for that is, are you seeing anything? I mean, you mentioned Stellantis there, you mentioned obviously that pre-reg activity. Is that being dominated by EVs? Because obviously EV now makes up a large proportion of the new vehicle availability. Is this now a drive to get market share as well as the Z mandate target thresholds?
Yeah, I think it is, and in part that's driven, and we haven't mentioned the Chinese in any way whatsoever yet, but I think that's partly pushed by them. In terms of EV share of whole market, excuse me, For May, as it stands at the moment, we have 8.2% of sales are EVs. Now, that's in comparison last month where it was 9.6%. So it's dropped quite a bit at this particular point. And I think perhaps that is around perhaps availability. But I was interested to see it drop from 9.6% of EV of the whole market share. Yeah, a little bit of a surprise there. When we're looking at in terms of the average trade price, the average trade price for an EV has dropped from 20,585 in April to 20,118 in May. So that actually is a drop of 3.3%.
And is that? I mean, obviously, is that as a combination of one supply, maybe oversupply, or life cycle along with that? Because obviously, over the years we've had more low cost entry product coming into the new vehicle market, and now those will be flowing through now into the used vehicle park as more affordable, lower cost of entry
Yeah,
EVs.
I think you're exactly right with that. We're seeing many more vehicles at a lower price point coming into the used car marketplace, and of course, if you're looking at it as a whole, the interesting piece is starting to look at what age the vehicles are and what happens to the trade price by the age of the vehicle, and that is driven around desirability for vehicles that arguably, as they've because they're older, have got a much lower and less usable range. I mean, I think I heard actually on your last weekend episode that we were talking about the average range of an EV now being somewhere just north of 300 miles, which, as you and I, Philip, have said for many years, that 300-mile point was a real turning point in terms of consumer desirability. But if you start to look at 6 to 10-year-old Leafs, where arguably you're probably going to get a range of about 120 miles, the pricing on those is lower to reflect that. The fact that that's a less desirable vehicle for a consumer, someone that is literally going to be running it around town. Whereas 300 plus miles, we know that's a week, maybe more for some people in terms of distance travelled.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree. I think the choice of product now coming into the used vehicle park, the range, alongside better knowledge, better insight coming into the sector, and infrastructure to support those EVs. It's kind of a combination of a few things now starting to help the transition to EV as a second hand vehicle as opposed to the new car market.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Well, we'll be back with more of Brego's trade value trends with Rupert after this brief break.
You're listening to a Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.
Welcome back. Rupert, you track the Chinese OEMs very closely. What trends stood out for you in May amongst some of the more established players and maybe some of the newer brands that we're seeing on the scene?
Yeah, we do track them really carefully. It's an important part of the marketplace at the moment. I think if we look at what's been going on in the new car market, we don't have the May figures yet, but if you look at data from the SMMT for April, the Chinese brands took 20.7% of total new car market registrations, and that's up from 11.3% the previous year. But it is the point. It's interesting to see that there are certain brands that are making more of an impact, and certainly in the new car marketplace, the Chery Group with their new Denza brand coming on board shortly, they took enough of the market share to actually put them in second place if you looked at them as a whole group. But when we start to look at what's going on in the used car market, when we're looking at listings, and for this, guys, I do say that I'm including Volvo and Lotus in this. When we're looking at what's going on in terms of used car listings, they have a 3.25% market share for May, which was interesting because that actually was slightly lower than it was in April. Now, it's interesting that I think that there are more vehicles coming to the marketplace, and the way in which they are selling and the speed with which they're selling sometimes distorts figures. This is what I was saying earlier on about the fact that there's more happening under the radar than you actually see. So working through the data in real detail is very, very valuable. If we look at the brand in brand terms overall, Volvo lead that share of listings at 2.3%, and the guys in second place are BYD with 0.33%. So you see that there is an awfully long way to go in the used car market for those Chinese entrants.
And it's kind of echoing where we were, I don't know, a decade ago when we were looking at the new car market, because certainly when I was at Motor Trader, we were tracking it on a monthly basis, and we'd see a tiny, tiny percentage of new EVs being sold. But that's now what we're seeing developing in the used car sector, isn't it? Because those small figures are starting to grow.
They are, and one of the interesting things for me as a comparison is to look back at when you started to see Kia coming into the marketplace, some sort of in volume, some sort of 15 or so years ago, and the speed with which they broke into new and used car sales was seen as fairly revolutionary at the time. But if you look at what's happening with the Chinese brands, it's shocking to see the speed with which they're taking new car market share. And I think the used car volumes will begin to increase specifically over the course of the next few months, because I know that there's been some rental activity with some of the Chinese brands, and those cars will be probably on fairly short churn, particularly where those particular brands have got high aspirations of market share, and it's one way for them to be able to both create new car registrations but also put more of their cars into the used car marketplace.
Yeah. And following on from that, Rupert, just how much of a challenge is it to determine something like trade values for the number of new Chinese brands that are coming to the UK where there's no track record and there's no existing data?
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
So that's difficult for some valuation providers. Because of the methodology we use in terms of a neural network valuation engine, that's something that has been designed over the years to be able to be accurate of very small amounts of data, and it also works on the basis that it is using comparison information from similar types of vehicles in market. And that gives us the opportunity to be able to be pretty accurate. We really trialed this when we were starting to try and value back in sort of 2019 the sort of Bugattis of the world and the really rare vehicles, but we're able to use that and be pretty accurate.
And I mean, sticking to that analysis, and we touched on it a couple of times around what's happening in the retail market, but what are you seeing in the month of May around those retail advert volumes, and what trends have you identified in May from what's happening in that sort of the retail marketplace?
What, in terms of the listing data?
Yeah, the listing, the adverts.
Yeah, okay. When we look at the volume of adverts we've seen during the course of May, that has actually dropped by 9% in comparison to April. Now, it could be because we're still coming towards the end of the month, and we do see quite a bit of activity, as I said, towards the end of the month. But so it's 9% lower than it was in April, but actually still 3.2% higher than it was in 2025. So that's interesting for us to see. And that brings me back to what I said earlier, that maybe dealers are being a bit reticent about stock. We know that in the auction environment and in the auction environment, the conversion rate has dropped a little bit, and it's more difficult for them there. But looking at listings, the interesting thing I found about the listings were that there were 15.5% less electric vehicle listings. So that is very interesting to me, because I think that highlights the fact that we're seeing strong sales activity in that area. I don't think that's about the dealers not being able to get enough cars. I think it's just the fact that they are selling them quicker. And as a result, when you look at the data over the course of a month, you see a lower figure. So when you look at that in comparison with the change we see for petrol cars at -2%, or diesel at up 1.1%, it is electric at -15.5%, hybrid at -5.6%, petrol PHEVs at -4.6%. All these sort of hybrid and electric vehicles are seeing a drop in the number of adverts, and that's sales driven.
So you think that pump price Middle East that you mentioned earlier with that conflict is now
Yeah.
playing into that alternative fuel, that EV marketplace?
Yeah, I think absolutely it is, and I think it's driving a behaviour with the consumer that is unique, and actually pretty welcome given the requirements of the ZEV mandate, because it's heightening the desirability of a different propulsion type, which I think is what we wanted, but we're probably getting to it in an unpalatable way.
And final question for you, Rupert. You also look at the best sellers. So, what were the best-selling used cars over the course of May? Who were the winners?
Well, I've got quite a bit of data on this one. So the top 5 fastest selling cars in May, which are 1-year-old cars, with more than 30 unit sales. The fastest seller was in fact the Kia Sportage 1.6T GDI hybrid, the GT line version, with an average time to sell of 11 and a half days. Second place is the Renault Symbioz Estate 1.6 E-Tech, and that's a hybrid as well, and that was 15.4 days. If we look at 3-year-old vehicles, and I referenced them earlier, the Polestar 2 sat in first place for a 3-year-old car, and it took an average of 10 days to sell. And that was followed at 3 years, the 3-year-old vehicles by 2 MG4s, just slightly different models. At 5 years old, the fastest selling car was the Nissan Qashqai hatchback, 1.3 DIGT connector at 16.4 days to sale. And finally, the 10 years old, fastest selling car, more than 30 units, the Mazda CX-5 diesel 2.2D, with 14.6 days to sale. But, the average sale price on that is £5,181. And that was followed by the Ford Focus hatchback, the 1 litre EcoBoost titanium at 17.8 days to sell. So there's actually quite for me, looking at that, there's quite a difference in type of vehicle and manufacturer, and a surprise for me too that in none of those categories did I see a Tesla Model 3, which is usually the case.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, it's quite a change for me. I think the Tesla Model 3s were coming in at about early 20 days average to sell.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the Ford Focus in there.
Yeah, there's always good to have a Ford in there. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This changes a bit if you look at it from the point of view of electric vehicles, and that is where you do, if you just focus on electric vehicles, that's when you do start to see some of the Teslas coming. But the one thing I will particularly mention was that if you're looking at a 1-year-old unit, I was quite surprised in the top 5 to see that there are 2 Polestar 4s. Which I think is a little bit of a surprise to see. Well, not a surprise, it's a welcome, actually, I suppose, to see what is, to some people, quite a controversial car, the Polestar 4, as being one of the fastest selling cars.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, you talk about the Polestar 2, but obviously now you've got that Polestar 4 coming in at the front end now. And as the prices come down for the Polestar 2, Polestar 3, and now the Polestar 4, that that Polestar 2 becomes a more affordable price range vehicle with volume coming into the marketplace.
I totally agree with you, and there is some volume coming into the marketplace on that. But the important thing is that it's finding a home now. That will be, I think, in part driven around the quality of the vehicle and the desirability of the vehicle. But there are quite a few of those coming. There aren't that many of the Polestar 4s around at 1 year old, and I think that's probably why they're in the fastest selling bit. But the first Polestar 4 came in third place at an average sale price of 39,270, but days to sale of 37.1. It's still pretty impressive to see, as I say, what some people term as a controversial in appearance vehicle selling so quickly.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, as always, Rupert, it's great to have you on, and what we always say is there's more detail behind this brief conversation with you, and anybody that isn't involved with Brego, then to reach out to you and just sort of delve into some of this data that you have at your fingertips. I mean, as Curtis pointed out at the introduction there, to have 2.2 billion data points to look at, and that you're tracking 1 million retail prices daily, gives any user of Brego real insight into up to the minute activity in the marketplace. That as we know, it's the detail, isn't it? It's the only detail that we need to be keeping an eye on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The detail is key. We have a function within our platform which we call Brego Insight, which actually allows users of the platform to be able to query the whole Brego data set with individual questions tailored to their exact needs, which is pretty unique in the marketplace. But yeah, the devil is always in the detail, and that's what businesses today need.
But that's all we have time for now. So many thanks, Rupert, for joining us. We'll catch up again this time next month to see how June and the first half performed. Many thanks for listening. We hope you found this trade values insight useful. Philip and I are back with the big car retailing headlines this weekend. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this Motor Trade Radio Trade Value Special with Brego, powered by Cazoo.